At exactly 5 a.m., I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, excitement humming in my chest. For the past 2 years, every late-night shift, every overtime hour, every canceled dinner date had led me to this moment. Finally, I could give my parents the dream vacation they'd always talked about, a luxurious week in Europe. I'd imagined every detail down to the cobblestone streets we'd stroll together, the cafes we'd linger in, laughing and making memories we'd cherish forever. I glanced at the clock again, 5:30 a.m., heart racing in anticipation. I triple-checked my suitcase, neatly packed days ago. I'd sacrificed so much for this. Skipped weekend hangouts, picked up extra projects at work, counted pennies meticulously, determined to show my parents how much I valued them, and maybe, finally, earn their pride and appreciation. But as I pulled into my parents' driveway at 6:02 a.m., just 2 minutes late, the warm excitement I felt turned strangely cold. My mother, Linda, stood on the porch, suitcase in hand, a tight expression etched across her face. "You're late, Emma," she stated bluntly, as if the 2 minutes erased years of effort. I tried to smile, determined not to spoil our special day. "Sorry, Mom. Let me help you with your bags." But before I could even move, the front door swung open again, and out stepped my younger sister, Mia, dragging her own suitcase, yawning carelessly. Confusion gripped my chest. Mia was the same carefree spirit who'd never worked a day in her life, whose greatest stress involved choosing filters for her social media photos. She had no part in this trip, at least she wasn't supposed to. "Mom," my voice trembled slightly. "What's Mia doing here?" "Oh," my mother said lightly, as though discussing nothing more important than the weather. "Your dad, and I decided Mia should come instead of you. She's been so stressed lately. She really needs this." I felt my heart drop. The unfairness of her words knocked the breath out of me, my chest tightening painfully. "Instead of me? Mom, I planned every moment of this trip. For years, I worked overtime just to afford this for you, Dad, and me." She waved her hand dismissively, barely even meeting my eyes. "Emma, you're always working. You'll have plenty of chances to travel later. Mia needs this right now." Mia smirked subtly, leaning casually against her suitcase, her eyes barely hiding her triumph. "Yeah, thanks for understanding, sis. Really appreciate it." I glanced helplessly at my father, Tom, but he avoided my gaze, quietly setting his luggage near the car, visibly uncomfortable yet unwilling to stand up for me. Standing there, in the bitter silence of that morning, it finally sank in. All my sacrifices, my exhaustion, the endless effort to be the perfect daughter, it was never enough. They'd chosen Mia, who'd given nothing, over me, who'd given everything. I stood frozen, watching as Mia happily loaded her suitcase into my car, taking the spot meant for me. My hands shook slightly, not just from anger, but from a lifetime of hurt now boiling to the surface. As I quietly got into the driver's seat, one thing became painfully clear. No matter how hard I worked, in their eyes, Mia would always come first. But maybe, just maybe, today was the day I'd stop accepting it. The drive to the airport felt endless, filled with a silence, so heavy it pressed down on me like thick fog. Mia's cheerful voice shattered the quiet as she excitedly described all the shopping she planned in Paris, oblivious, or perhaps deliberately indifferent, to the pain gnawing at my chest. Each of her carefree words jabbed at me, a reminder of every sleepless night I'd spent hunched over my desk, every weekend I'd sacrificed for extra shifts, and every time I'd canceled plans just to save another dollar. Meanwhile, Mia had breezed effortlessly through life, never once knowing what sacrifice truly meant. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed my parents smiling indulgently at Mia's chatter, their faces bright with enthusiasm for a trip I'd painstakingly created for us. The stark unfairness of it felt like salt in an open wound. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning white, as I fought to contain the tidal wave of anger swelling inside me. "Emma, you're so quiet," Mia remarked casually from the back seat, leaning forward slightly. "You're not upset, are you? I mean, it's not like you won't get another chance later, right?" I swallowed hard, my throat painfully dry. Her entitlement, so effortlessly dismissive of my effort, cut deeply. Still, I kept my voice controlled, masking the bitterness beneath. Of course, Mia. I'm fine. Enjoy the trip. My mother reached forward, patting my shoulder lightly, her touch hollow and detached. We're grateful you understand, Emma. You always were the mature one. Those words felt hollow, insulting even. Mature. Understanding. Reliable. Those were labels they'd always used to justify putting me second. But now, something deep within me shifted, quietly but irreversibly. I no longer wanted their hollow praise. I wanted fairness, recognition, and respect, things they'd never willingly given me. When we reached the airport drop-off zone, I stepped out, silently unloading their bags. As Mia breezed past me, she offered a fleeting smile, one filled with a smug confidence that whispered, "I win again." My father hesitated for a moment, meeting my eyes briefly, a flicker of shame in his gaze, but he said nothing. He'd always preferred silence over conflict, even when silence hurt the ones he claimed to love. My mother embraced me perfunctorily, murmuring a meaningless thank you. "We'll see you when we're back, Emma. Take care, all right." I nodded stiffly, unable to utter a word, and watched them walk away into the bustling terminal, happy, excited, and completely oblivious to my pain. As I drove home alone, my chest tight, tears burning behind my eyes, the depth of their betrayal finally sunk in. I'd spent a lifetime trying to earn their love, respect, and recognition, believing I was just one success, one act of generosity away from finally being seen. But today, with brutal clarity, I understood. No amount of sacrifice would ever be enough for them. Pulling into my driveway, something new stirred inside me. Not just hurt, but resolve. I'd always been the fixer, the responsible one, quietly absorbing their disregard. But not this time. Not anymore. Pulling into my driveway, the silence in the car seemed deafening. I sat motionless for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilling down my cheeks. The pain was raw, familiar, a quiet voice whispering that maybe I should just accept this, as I always had. But another voice, stronger now, rose fiercely from somewhere deep inside my heart. Stepping into my home, I opened my laptop with trembling fingers. My screen illuminated the painstaking itinerary I'd crafted, each hotel reservation, private tour, and carefully selected restaurant, all symbols of love and sacrifice that now felt painfully meaningless. My cursor hovered hesitantly over the cancel button. Doubt crept in, my heart racing with anxiety and guilt. Could I really do this to them, my family? Yet, flashes of Mia's smug expression, my mother's casual dismissal, and my father's silent indifference swept through my mind again, igniting a quiet fire in my chest. For too many years, I'd allowed their needs to overshadow my own happiness, my own dreams. Maybe now, for the first time in my life, it was time to choose me, to finally place myself first. With a deep, steadying breath, my heart still pounding, I clicked cancel, watching confirmations fill the screen. Each canceled reservation sent waves of liberation and anxiety washing over me simultaneously. It wasn't easy. Standing up for myself never was, but this was my turning point. This was the day Emma finally became her own priority. And for once, I felt a small, empowering spark. I deserved better, and I was finally brave enough to demand it. The calls began just as their flight touched down in Europe. My phone buzzed relentlessly, flooding the room with tension. Messages lit up my screen, each one more frantic than the last. "Emma, the hotel says our reservations were canceled. Call me immediately."
Mom.
"Emma, fix this now. This isn't funny."
Mia.
"Emma, please explain what's going on."
Dad.
I stood frozen, heart racing, eyes locked on the frantic messages piling up. My finger hovered over the screen, old instincts urging me to apologize, to immediately undo what I'd done. After all, wasn't that my role? The fixer, the responsible one, The daughter who always quietly cleaned up after everyone else's mistakes? But as I stared at the endless stream of angry demands, something different rose within me. I'd been their safety net for so long that they'd forgotten I had feelings, boundaries, and limits. Every message felt entitled, dismissive of my effort, oblivious to the pain they'd caused me. My phone buzzed again, this time a voicemail from Mia. With a shaky breath, I pressed play. Her voice cut through, sharp and entitled. "Emma, this is ridiculous. Mom and Dad are embarrassed and furious. Seriously, fix this immediately. It's petty, even for you."
Petty.
The word stung, echoing painfully through my chest. Was it petty to want respect, acknowledgement, fairness? Was it petty to finally stand up for myself after years of silent sacrifice? For a split second, I almost believed her. Doubt crept back in, whispering guilt and uncertainty. But as Mia's entitled tone replayed in my mind, bitterness turned quickly into resolve. Enough was enough. I dialed my mother's number, bracing myself as her voice hit me like a wave of cold fury. "Emma, have you lost your mind? What exactly do you think you're doing?" Her voice shook with barely restrained anger. I took a deep breath, steadying the trembling inside me. "Mom, you chose Mia instead of me. You took my gift, my sacrifice, my years of effort, and tossed them aside like they meant nothing. Why should I continue funding a vacation I wasn't even invited to?" A stunned silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable, before her voice came back, sharply defensive. "We thought you'd understand." Mia needed. I interrupted firmly, emotion thickening my voice. "Mia always needs, and you always give at my expense. I've spent my life trying to earn your appreciation, but I'm done. If Mia needed this trip, you should have planned it yourselves." "You're being selfish," my mother snapped, her voice bitter. "Am I?" I asked quietly, feeling a surprising sense of calmness take hold. "Or am I finally treating myself with the respect none of you have ever shown me?"
She had no reply.
Her silence, angry yet uncertain, spoke louder than words. I hung up gently, placing the phone face down on the table, feeling strangely lighter, freer than I'd ever felt before. Standing alone in my living room, I closed my eyes, allowing myself a brief, fragile moment of peace. This was my turning point, the moment Emma finally chose herself. It wasn't comfortable or easy, but it was essential. For the first time, I realized clearly, I wasn't punishing them, I was simply refusing to punish myself any longer. The next morning, my phone erupted again, vibrating with desperate intensity. Each message was a fresh accusation, a stab of blame aimed squarely at my heart. "Mom, Emma, do you realize what you've done? We spent the night in some awful motel. You've humiliated us. Call me immediately, Mia. You're unbelievable, Emma. Dad is furious, and Mom won't stop crying. Fix your mess now. Dad. Emma, this isn't like you. Call us back, so we can discuss this reasonably." A familiar ache squeezed at my chest. Guilt and anxiety crept in, begging me to revert to old habits, apologize, smooth things over, quietly restore their comfort. But the thought of slipping back into that endless cycle was unbearable. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. Eventually, I answered when my father called again, the phone heavy in my hand. "Emma," he began stiffly, his tone distant yet charged with restrained anger. "This needs to stop. Your mother and sister are beside themselves. You've taken things too far." "I've taken things too far?" My voice shook, anger and hurt fighting to surface. "Dad, do you understand how unfair this is? For years, I've been invisible, sacrificing everything for all of you. And the one time I finally say no, it's too far?" He sighed heavily, discomfort evident in his silence. "You know your sister has always struggled. We thought you'd understand. You're the strong one." "Exactly," I interrupted, voice rising despite myself. "I'm always the strong one, which apparently means I don't deserve appreciation or fairness. Mia is constantly rewarded for doing nothing, while I'm punished for doing everything right." He hesitated, clearly torn, voice lower now, softer. "Emma, please, it's not easy here. We're stranded, embarrassed. People are staring." A bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. "So now you understand embarrassment. Welcome to how I felt my entire life. Always overlooked, always replaced, always second best. But I'm done feeling guilty for your choices." From behind him, Mia's voice rang out impatiently, piercing the fragile moment. "Dad, stop begging her. She's being childish. She'll fix it, she always does." Hearing her entitlement, so clear, so unwavering, snapped the last thread of my restraint. "No," I said firmly, my voice steady, clear, definitive. "Not this time. You all decided Mia's needs were more important than my feelings, my effort, my dignity.
Fine.
But don't expect me to rescue you from the consequences." I paused, gathering strength. "Enjoy your trip," I added quietly, "or whatever's left of it." "Emma," my father started, but this time it was I who ended the call. My heart pounded, tears blurred my vision, but relief rushed through me, a profound, cleansing release. For years, I'd quietly suffered their indifference, absorbing every injustice, every dismissal. Today, I'd finally drawn a line. And despite the lingering ache of guilt and sadness, one thing was clearer now than ever before. I was done apologizing for demanding respect. Now they would finally understand what it felt like to bear their own burdens. In the quiet days that followed, my phone eventually fell silent, giving way to an eerie calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't caught in the chaotic current of my family's demands, guilt trips, or blame. Instead, I found myself standing still, facing the overwhelming yet liberating silence. But peace didn't come easily. At night, alone in bed, doubts crept in, whispering softly, reminding me of my mother's tears, my father's discomfort, Mia's outrage. The questions lingered stubbornly. Had I gone too far? Had I become the selfish person they'd accused me of being? Kate arrived unannounced one afternoon, concern softening her eyes. "Your mom called me," she said gently, placing 2 coffees down and studying my face carefully. "She wanted me to convince you to apologize." I glanced away, voice barely above a whisper. "And what did you say?" Kate's words resonated deeply, soothing the raw edges of guilt and doubt. In her eyes, I saw a reflection of strength I hadn't recognized in myself. For once, someone validated that my boundaries weren't selfish. They were necessary. That evening, as I sat alone, journaling thoughts I'd never dared to voice before, I realized just how deeply the unfairness had shaped my entire life. Every family holiday, every birthday, every casual conversation had been quietly overshadowed by Mia's wants, her moods, her needs, while mine faded silently into the background. But now, something powerful shifted inside me. By taking a stand, I'd uncovered a strength that felt both unfamiliar and empowering. I understood clearly that setting boundaries wasn't a betrayal, it was an act of self-respect. Picking up my phone again, I found several new messages. My mother's tone had softened, admitting quietly, "Perhaps we handled things badly." My father's brief text acknowledged awkwardly, "Maybe we misunderstood your feelings." Even Mia's silence spoke volumes. Yet I knew reconciliation couldn't come so easily this time. They'd apologized before, only to repeat the same patterns again and again. True healing would take more than words. It required genuine change. Closing my eyes, I took a deep, steadying breath. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. I'd likely face more confrontations, more uncomfortable truths. But for the first time, I felt ready, determined, and unafraid. I'd finally found my voice, and I refused to silence it ever again. In choosing myself, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. The Emma they once knew, the quiet, compliant fixer, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, braver, unapologetic in demanding fairness, respect, and love. And now, at last, I was ready to begin writing my own story, on my own terms. Weeks passed before I finally saw them again. Sitting in their driveway, My heart beat faster than I'd expected, anxiety mixing with determination. I had rehearsed countless scenarios, prepared for every possible reaction. Yet, as my parents' taxi pulled up, nerves fluttered uncomfortably in my chest. They stepped out, looking drained, shadows of frustration still lingering in their eyes. Mia, trailing behind, scowled openly at the sight of me. My mother was first to speak, bitterness edging her voice. "I hope you're satisfied, Emma. It was a complete disaster." I remained calm, meeting her gaze evenly. "I never wanted things to end this way. But did you honestly expect me to keep silently absorbing your disregard?" Mia interrupted, arms folded defensively. "You embarrassed us, Emma, over a petty grudge." I held her gaze firmly, surprising myself with newfound strength. "Petty? Mia, for years you've benefited from my sacrifices without ever acknowledging them. You've always expected everything handed to you, and Mom and Dad have enabled it. If standing up for myself makes me petty, so be it." An uneasy silence fell. My father broke it quietly, his voice weary. "Emma, we realized things got out of hand, but you didn't have to cancel everything." My voice softened, tinged with sadness, but unyielding. "You didn't have to replace me, Dad. You made a choice, and I made mine. I spent years waiting for you all to recognize my efforts, but now I'm done waiting." My mother exhaled slowly, her voice uncertain, softer now. "Emma, maybe we didn't realize just how much this meant to you." "That's exactly the problem," I replied gently, firmly. "You never even try to understand. Everything I've ever done was to earn your approval, your recognition, but it never came. So I'm choosing myself now." They stood silently, absorbing my words. For once, none of them argued or demanded more from me. It was as if they were finally seeing the daughter they'd overlooked for so long, perhaps clearly for the first time. "I'm not closing the door completely," I said, my voice steady yet gentle. "But from now on, things must be different. I won't accept less than respect. If we rebuild this family, it has to be on new terms." They nodded hesitantly, Mia still quiet, eyes cast downward. I saw, perhaps, the faintest beginnings of understanding flickering in their faces. Driving home afterward, my chest felt lighter, the years of resentment slowly unraveling. The conversation hadn't solved everything, but it was an honest start, an opportunity to redefine our family's future. A few months later, as I stepped off the plane alone into the warm Italian sunlight, my pulse quickened with exhilaration. This trip was entirely mine, crafted solely for my happiness. No longer burdened by family expectations or the relentless need for their approval, I felt alive, brave, and free in a way I never had before. Each day spent wandering the cobblestone streets, indulging in small cafes, and marveling at ancient ruins reminded me of how much I'd grown. Finally, I discovered who Emma truly was beyond the role of daughter, sister, or family fixer. Back home, my parents occasionally reached out, slowly learning to respect the boundaries I'd clearly drawn. Mia stayed distant at first, gradually realizing the entitlement she'd once thrived on was no longer acceptable. Our family healing wasn't immediate. It was slow, cautious, and genuine. And that was enough. Sitting one evening on a rooftop terrace overlooking Florence, journal in hand, I wrote a simple but powerful promise to myself. Never again will I sacrifice my worth for anyone else's comfort. In that moment, I knew I was exactly where I belonged, not in the shadows of someone else's needs, but fully present, deeply happy, and unapologetically myself. My new story had just begun, and this time, I was the author.